My first girlfriend, Crystal, died at 16, right after I broke up with her. For a long time I thought it was just a coincidence. I felt differently when my next girlfriend, Nicole, died right after we broke up a few years later. They both died in odd circumstances. Crystal crashed her car flat sober on a straight road by herself. Nicole drowned in the bathtub after falling asleep. Both were labeled as accidents. I was never questioned by police, but plenty of people around town talked, wondered if I was cursed. I wondered the same. Then I moved away. The military took me all the way across the country, and I was happy. I fell in love with a girl named Katie. Everything was good until I went to a cousin's wedding out of town by myself. The drinks flowed, too many. I lost control. I got in deep with a girl there I thought was too hot to not keep talking to and keep drinking with. We ended up back at my hotel room. I was too drunk to stop. We had sex, and she stayed the night with me. I woke up with an instant sinking feeling of regret. I also woke up alone, but the girl whose name I couldn't even remember was in the bathroom. She was crying. I listened to her weep uncontrollably for a few moments, unsure of what to do. Then I heard glass breaking, and I rushed into the bathroom. The girl from the night before was in there with a shard of broken mirror in her grasp. I begged her not to hurt herself. She screamed back at me that she loved her boyfriend, and she couldn't believe what she had done and she wanted to die. Then she inexplicably started saying a name I hadn't heard in years. Holly Eve. Hearing that name reached into the darkest recesses of my brain. Holly Eve was a dirt poor girl in my 5th grade class. Homely, she was teased and someone who received no interest as someone anyone wanted to date. Instead, she was mocked. We went too far. Someone dared me to ask out Holly Eve and pretend to be her boyfriend for a week. I agreed to do it, trying to impress my peers. Holly Eve seemed to have no idea the thing was a farce. She held my hand on the schoolyard and didn't seem to see the other kids snickering all the while. The worst part is I could feel she was sweet and genuine during our time together. She was a nice person. I had to get out of it. I had my friend break up with her a few days into the spoof relationship. Holly Eve was crushed. I felt horrible. She never made eye contact with me again. One day after recess, I came back to my desk and found a piece of paper with burnt ends, and found an endless abyss of vulgar and dark words scrawled all over it in black ink and pentagrams. I tried to decipher what it specifically all meant but couldn't. It just said awful things. Embarrassed and guilty, I never told anyone about it or confronted Holly Eve about it. Holly Eve moved away at the end of that school year. One of the girls in the class said she lived near her and thought her parents were deep into the occult, witches, spells, all that kind of stuff. I figured it was bull. It wasn't until I heard the woman in the bathroom screaming out her name that all those scrawled words of hate and love and darkness on that burnt paper Holly Eve left on my desk came back into my head. That dark little girl must have cursed me and any lover that left me. Holly Eve. The word spat out of my one-night stand in the bathroom and snatched me out of my memory dive. Then the woman took that shard of glass and ferociously sliced both of her wrists. Before I could even try to do anything, the girl from the wedding ended up living, and she explained to everyone that she did what she did to herself and wanted to cover up for me being there to protect her own relationship, so I got lucky and no one ever found out. I know what you're thinking now though, but don't. The girl later died after her wounds were infected from the gashes. The curse was still alive. I had an easy solution to it all. I was going to marry Katie and stay with her forever. I proposed. She was a bit thrown off by the haste, but she said yes. Everything was going well. We kept going through the motions of love and prep and slow planning our wedding. I wasn't in any particular hurry. Then I came home one day, and her wedding ring was resting on the kitchen counter with a note that she was leaving me. No particular reason given. She said in the note she had to stay away from me for a week so she could be clear of mind. There was no way I could make that happen. I knew I was racing a clock. I was waiting to hear that she had died every second as I drove around going to every place that she could be. I found her at her sister's house, and after hours of pleading and explaining that her safety was in serious question, she finally came out and talked to me in the yard. I explained everything. I watched her face convey that she now regretted every single second of our relationship. Then she walked inside. Weeks went by without much sleep. I kept just thinking I was soon going to be invited to her funeral. And I wondered if it would be in some circumstance where people thought I might have done it to her. She showed up in the middle of the night one night with a knock on my door. I let her in, so happy to see her alive and breathing. She explained she had nearly died in 3 separate freak accidents since she left me. She believed in the curse. She could feel it inside her. She had suicidal thoughts she had never even imagined before. We had to be together. The wedding was back on. Now you're probably wondering, why did that dark little girl who I screwed with back in 5th grade do something that ultimately won me back the love of my life? Wasn't she now going to kill Katie? Or something? The thing was, my time away from Katie made me realize that I didn't love her. I didn't really miss her, and enjoyed my time alone. I thought about my previous, dearly departed partners, and thought I loved them more than her, and I dreamed of a relationship that would truly bring it all together for me. I was cursed with a fake love forever, or I had to be okay with Katie dying. So the fake relationship I pranked that poor girl with in 5th grade meant I was going to be stuck in a fake relationship for the rest of my life. Well played, Holly Eve. A while back I shared my story of how all my exes die after we break up. At the time I published it, I thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't, Katie. And I went through the motions of our loveless marriage, knowing the alternative was death for her, though sometimes I could tell she was wondering if that might be better. What was the point of living a life where you could never experience love? I could handle it, but I couldn't handle watching Katie struggle to handle it. I would wake up in the middle of the night to her crying to herself. I had to see if there was some way to solve the curse Holly Eve had over me. I turned to the internet. I was shocked to quickly find a subreddit dedicated to Holly Eve and people who had fallen victim to her curse just like me. I put out a signal to get people on the sub to reach out to me, explaining what I explained in my previous story. Colin wasn't the first to reach out to me about Holly Eve, but he's where the rest of this story has to all start. We met at a dive bar in San Francisco. He kept looking around like he was scared someone was going to find him in there. He had the most broken energy of anyone I had ever met. Colin was haunted by the apparition of a young woman, scorched and melting. The smell of burning human flesh appeared before he would see her. Then she would appear where he was, frequently lighting up the night as a sooty human flame which shrieked with the force of a dying child, staring at him with unforgiving eyes. This vision would have been bad enough just for Colin. The problem was the apparition always appeared the first night Colin was alone with a girl. It started in high school and was still going on, now into his 30s. It always followed the same script. Colin found new love, even if just for a night sometimes. He and the girl eventually got alone. Shortly after, the apparition appeared, horrified the girl, and she ran away. If the rare girl came back for a second try, the same thing would happen. The apparition would appear in some new shocking way. Pop up in a mirror, hang upside from the ceiling, slip into the covers once he and the girl did. No one ever lasted longer than a second try. He gave up on trying to experience any kind of love or intimacy in his 20s. He withdrew and became celibate. To him, his life was essentially over. There was almost no joy, just fear and pain. Then he tried to give it one last try, thinking he may have found a loophole. He went to a friend's bachelor party and ended up in a hotel room alone, getting a lap dance from a stripper for longer than he would like to admit. The apparition never came, and he wondered, what if it won't come if there's not even a hint of love in the transgression? Purely just a business transaction. He hired a sex worker and went to her hotel room. He wanted to see if he could experience some kind of physical fulfillment and not be haunted. It started out well. He got the deed done for the first time in his life. It was relieving, shockingly professional, but enjoyable, and he thought he found a new way to get some kind of release in his life in the arena of what you could call the closest he could get to love without terror. The sex worker went to the bathroom after things were over. Colin grew alarmed when 10 minutes went by and she didn't come out. He knocked on the door. All he heard was crying. "What is this?" He heard her voice ring out at him through the door. Colin tried to get her to explain what was going on in the bathroom. She just screamed back, "You better be out of here when he gets here." Colin didn't know who he was, but he didn't want to stick around to find out. He quickly found out he wasn't going to have a choice. He heard the door to the room unlock, and quickly Colin was looking at one of the largest men he had ever seen in his life. The intimidating man he described as the woman's manager grabbed him by the back of the neck and dragged him over to the bathroom door. The woman in the bathroom eventually was okay with opening the door. Slowly, Talon said he could smell that burning smell before he even saw what was going on in the bathroom. Still, he was not prepared for what he was going to see. The sex worker was in the middle of the room. Wrapped around her from behind was the apparition of Holly Eve. Charred and burning, a haze of smoke billowing around them. Talon could see Holly Eve's arms held tight on the sex worker's body, and she watched it burn into her. She screamed in pain as Holly Eve held her tighter as Colin and her manager approached the bathroom doorway. Talon could also see Holly Eve's eyes burning into him, torturing him. The apparition knew what it was doing. He could feel it. Talon felt the hard metal of the manager's gun hit him up against the head before he could try and move. Then he fell hard to the ground. With his final couple of blinks, Colin saw the manager carrying the sex worker out of the bathroom, still smoldering, and he saw Holly Eve standing there in the bathroom. Colin then spent most of his time sitting on Reddit, looking for people like me out there who had similar experiences, so he could try and find some solution to the curse he was living. Well, I was the same as him more or less. So what could I do? It seemed to me that he might be able to help me more than I could help him. I wanted to know how this all started for him, but he had conveniently avoided that part. At this point, he started to get sheepish, blushing and breaking eye contact, staring down into the fourth drink he had almost finished in an hour. He clearly didn't want to talk about how this curse all started, but he started anonymously. I brought this on all of us myself. Talon was born and raised in a small town on the California coast, just a few towns over from where I grew up. A rich kid. He explained he was much better looking when he was younger. He said it so many times it started to really weird me out. He was a decent looking guy with some extra pounds. Who really cares? He also kept insisting that I don't judge him until I hear his full story. He knew the girl who was his apparition, Holly Eve. She showed up on the first day of 7th grade. No one ever asked where she came from, and she never volunteered the information. She just kind of appeared one day. She stood out. She wasn't the typical small town girl most of the boys flocked to. She was edgy, odd, and haunting, yet beautiful. He said now she would be the kind of girl who'd become a fashion model because she had a look, but would swear she was never popular growing up because she was always just tall and awkward. All of this drew Colin in. Only problem was there was no way he could be with her, as he mentioned repeatedly. He was very good looking. He was rich. He was the coolest kid in school. He could never date the weird girl who showed up with holes in her shoes and a 1,000-foot stare. Colin got overconfident though. He thought if Holly Eve became his girlfriend, then he could make her cool, make her attractive. He asked her out. She was shocked and then said yes. Colin loved spending time with her. She was easygoing, cute, and sweet when no one was around. She was different from the other girls he had dated in the best way. She did not become the most popular girl in school. Things actually got worse. She used to kind of just be an afterthought at school, but now everyone in his class was making fun of her, and the other girls were singling her out. Colin tried to press through it. He tried to sell his friends on how she was actually really cute. She was actually really cool. She was funny. It didn't work. No one else saw it. Everyone also kept asking Colin the same damn question. Was it a joke? He eventually relented. Yes, he lied. The whole thing was just a big joke. Then he had to break Holly Eve's heart. Holly Eve had fallen in love with Colin, and he knew it. It was not going to be easy to go through with all of it, but dumping her would allow him to go back to his normal schoolyard life of not getting made fun of and questioned constantly. He had felt his popularity slipping. He had to do it. She took it even worse than he thought. She sobbed uncontrollably, hyperventilated. She kept asking him why. Why? Colin had to stop himself while telling me this part. I could feel the pain channeling through her. And then hitting me. No wonder this poor girl was haunting the world. He started to act strangely. He didn't want to tell the story anymore. He said he had to go to the bathroom and then never came back. I only got him on the phone eventually. When I called from a different phone number, he talked to me long enough to tell me that Holly Eve did die. Not at his hand though. That was all he would say. Well, he did say that she burned to death just before he hung up. I went home that night and didn't think too much of it. There were plenty of other Holly Eve victims I was in contact with. Colin may have been just another link in the chain, though I couldn't deny it seemed like this was the origin story for Holly Eve. And that made this thread possibly stronger than the other ones I was pursuing. I got some confirmation on that one after I ate dinner at home that night. My nose began to tickle as soon as I sat down after eating. And the smells of the meal went away. Something began to sting my nose and eyes. It felt and smelled like when the plume of a campfire gets thrown in your direction. I didn't think anything of it until I started to feel like I was no longer alone. And the smell kept getting more and more intense. I walked into the kitchen, wondering if I had left something burning on the stove or something. I was greeted by a blinding plume of smoke as soon as I opened the door and stepped in. I couldn't see anything. I could only feel and hear. I felt a cold hand drawn on my neck, and I heard someone crying uncontrollably and hyperventilating. Then I heard them asking over and over and over again why. I was able to get out of the room and come back later. The smoke was gone. The crying was gone. Holly Eve was gone. I knew it was her. Yet, it was troubling she simply presented herself that way to me, and aggressively. This was more than simply destroying my love life. I contacted Colin every way that I could. Reddit messages, texts, voicemails. It was a day before he responded on Reddit. I'm sorry, she just won't stop. Best of luck, Colin. Then his account was deleted. Eric lived down in Los Angeles. He was a failed actor pushing 40, and somehow an eternal optimist. Holly Eve showed up in Eric's class in 6th grade, a mysterious new kid that caught the eye of the self-described shy loner. She was manic pixie dream girl before that was even a known thing, Eric explained. She was this little girl plopped down into my rural Southern Oregon hometown, sitting there in a flower dress, long black hair, big eyes, sad eyes. I'll always remember the saddest eyes I've ever seen. Eric drank $15 craft cocktails as he told the story like they were the oxygen he needed to stay alive. And his eyes floated around the bar like a madman's. He was either crazy or Holly Eve had ruined him over the years. First girl I was ever brave enough to talk to. I think because I could tell she was a little weirdo, just like me. I talked to her slowly and eventually asked her to be my girlfriend in the library. No one else seemed to want to talk to the kids who were reading sci-fi books and faking injuries to get out of PE. Eric went on. Eric and Holly Eve started a little 6th grade love for the ages. A lot of hand-holding, some kisses, and some sweet notes, but that was it. She didn't talk much or seem to really have much of an opinion on or memory about anything. She kind of just listened to him most of the time. I was definitely the typical 90s problematic male, mansplaining everything, talking endlessly about The Simpsons, Star Wars, Stephen King, video games, Monty Python, Weezer, and all this typical nerd boy stuff. I should have known something was up when she kept listening to my stuff. Really? Eric rambled. There was another odd thing about his young romance with Holly Eve. When people weren't looking, she got aggressive. If no one was around and we were kissing, she would bite my lip, draw blood. She would slap me out of nowhere. I don't know. I kind of just thought, hey, I guess this is an adult relationship. I guess it explains a lot why I can't keep one now, Eric said. Eric's demeanor started to change. He started to get a bit wispy and nostalgic. It was the best thing I ever had. I know we were young and I probably sound psychotic saying this, but I really felt like we had a connection I've never had with other girls. I know I shouldn't, but I almost miss it, Eric explained. I wanted to know where Eric's story went from here, and was tired of hearing about his longings for whatever cursed little romance he had with Holly Eve. Every girl he ever dated after Holly Eve slowly turned abusive on him, all the way from middle school up until his mid-20s. Verbal, mental, physical, he got it all. Every kind of girl too. Even if they seemed like the sweetest thing, eventually they would turn. He would even check in with other ex-boyfriends of the girls, and they would all swear the girls never got like that with them. It was just him. Eric explained he thought the problem may have been that he was drawn to women who looked like Holly Eve. Pale, long dark hair, big sad eyes, detached demeanor. He thought that maybe if he found the opposite it would help, and he thought he had solved the curse. He didn't. I'll let Eric share the story in his own words from my recording. Her name was Jordan. She looked nothing like Holly Eve, short, tan, blonde, bubbly, full of life, natural smile. We met on an app. It took a year of me avoiding girls like Holly Eve. I swear it was like they were drawn to me. I'd constantly get likes from girls who were way out of my league, but they were just exactly Holly Eve. Jordan and I were perfect. She liked the same weird stuff I did, was like an extroverted introvert, which is like so hard to find in Los Angeles. You mostly get one or the other. Things moved quickly because of all that. We were basically living together in a month. Happiest I've ever been. This nice, hot, positive girl is just hanging out at my trashy apartment all the time. Sorry, I struggle to even talk about her without feeling like I couldn't have saved it. But after like 3 months, I'm thinking about marriage. Don't say that, obviously, but it's in my head. Like how a girl thinks about her first name sounds with her new guy's last name so quick. That was me. I kept waiting for it to turn. I kept waiting to meet up with her at her place and have her throw a glass at me or scratch my neck for no reason. But it just never happened. We went on our first trip, a road trip weekend up in Big Sur. I splurged. Get this big cabin up above the rocks. The first night starts great. Good dinner, good wine, good scenery, good sex. I fall asleep without even realizing it. I wake up in the middle of the night. She wasn't there. I look all over the house and can't find her. Start to panic. I walk out onto the deck and look down at the rocks and rough water below. I wonder for a minute if she jumped. I turned and saw her on the roof, standing up there in the moonlight. I was relieved until I saw the noose in her grasp. She started slowly walking towards me on the roof, getting right to the edge, getting me to shut up. Please, Jordan, I pleaded one more time as she stopped on the edge of the roof. The rope isn't for me, it's for you, Jordan sadly said so flat I almost didn't register what she said. What? I asked and stepped forward. Jordan jumped off the roof without hesitation, her feet landing right on my chest. She caught me off guard and was able to pin me down in just a few seconds. She slipped the noose on my neck before I could do anything. I tried to fight. I'm not the biggest or strongest guy, and she got the jump on me. She dragged me off the deck in the blink of an eye and got the noose around my neck. I was suddenly hanging hundreds of feet above jagged rocks, the noose around my neck. I looked up and saw Jordan above me for 1 second as I felt the noose tighten around my neck. There was no sorry in her eyes, just rage. She walked away, leaving me there, hanging. Luckily, I had grabbed the inside of the noose before I dropped, and was able to wedge my hand in there enough to where I could keep it from choking me for a while, but I would eventually run out of energy. I heard the sound of my car driving away. Jordan had left me there for dead. My only hope was a light I saw off in the distance. There must have been another house nearby. I screamed for my life, straight for a good 5 minutes. I heard a car pull up in front of the cabin. I wondered if Jordan was coming back to finish me off. I was relieved when I saw a man arrive. He saved my life. Eric was shook up. He said he needed another drink and a half before he went on. He explained Jordan connected with him the next morning, apoplectic and apologetic. She wondered if he was going to tell the police. She said she deserved to go to jail. She didn't know what happened. It was like something else took over her the night before and did everything, and she could only watch. Eric didn't turn her in. He had been through this before. It wasn't her fault. They just wouldn't see each other anymore. Eric gave up dating at that point. No more apps. Nothing. He had to be celibate. He explained the worst part was the more he fought it, the more Holly Eve's curse tried to pull him in. The more women hit on him. The more beautiful women hit on him. Eric and I shared some more drinks before I was nearly blacked out and had to excuse myself. Any doubt I had about if Eric was telling the truth vanished when I saw him getting into his car in the parking lot. I watched a sultry, dark-haired Los Angeles beauty, easily could have been a model or actress, walk up to the awkward and out-of-shape gargoyle. That was Eric as he got into his car in the parking lot. She was throwing serious flirtations at him. He smiled politely and drove away. I watched the woman walk past me as she left the lot. Her eyes were as black as oil. The intensity of Holly Eve's newfound presence in my life scared me. I decided it was best to back off, at least for a while. I successfully kept Holly Eve out of my life for almost a year. When I received a message from Casey on Reddit, Casey was unlike the other Holly Eve informants, younger, brighter, and unbroken. He was actually still in high school and it was unclear if he was intentionally goth or if he was just pale and wore dark clothes. Holly Eve showed up at his school on the first day of school. He was drawn to her immediately. It was like someone had cooked up a fellow odd, semi-goth, who struggled to make conversation and dropped her into his little rural town along the rugged Northern California coast. Like Colin, his hometown was in the same county I grew up in. Casey and Holly Eve started a quiet romance. They ate lunch together, two weirdos in the back of the lunchroom. They walked home together, two weirdos who happily cut through the cemetery to get home quicker. They listened to ambient music in his room alone. They would make out for hours in his room, never worrying about whether his casino-addicted parents would come home. Casey would then walk Holly Eve home to a dark house on the edge of town. They would share a kiss, and then she'd slink away, never inviting him in. One night as they stood there in her driveway, he told her he loved her. The phrase seemed to startle her. She froze up and stared at him for an awkward 10 seconds. Eventually, she kissed him. Then he never saw her again. Casey asked around at school. No one knew anything about her. The school office had no record of a student by that name. He went to her house and walked up close, knocked on the door. It appeared to be abandoned. Had he never actually watched her walk in? Casey started Googling Holly Eve and quickly came across the subreddit about her curse. It took him a long time to absorb everything, but it also started to make sense. It seemed all of the people on the sub who ran into Holly Eve were on the rural coast of Northern California, and it seemed to span over the course of 20 years. I was the only one who responded to Casey's message. I noted it seemed like things had gone quiet on the Holly Eve front. It may have been in response to Holly Eve suddenly getting stronger not long before. I told Casey about the origin story of Holly Eve and Colin and their false, broken love. Casey then dropped a bombshell. He had found some actual information online about Holly Eve as a teenage girl, and he tracked down Holly Eve's mom, Kelly, and had met with her. Casey earned Kelly's trust and got her to share even more about the manipulation of Colin and how it broke Holly Eve's heart and spirit. The poor young girl really thought they were in love. And when you are 13, you think everything that happens to you is the rest of your life. Kelly also explained what happened to Holly Eve that Colin would only hint at. Kelly wasn't sure how it started, and she didn't want to believe that Holly Eve started it herself. But Holly Eve's house nearly burnt down the night Colin broke up with her. Holly Eve never got out. They found something Holly Eve wore next to where her body was, a silver necklace that was half of a heart. Kelly was able to remember Holly Eve had started wearing it a few weeks before. She had asked about it, and Holly Eve had said it was from a boy, and he had the other half. Kelly had Holly Eve's half of the heart necklace. She didn't know where the other half was. I felt like we suddenly had an incredible clue and a potential solution. Could we solve the curse if we could get the other half of the heart necklace back? We had to track down Colin. Colin wouldn't respond to any of my messages. I worried he might be dead. Casey and I had to sleuth hard online and turn into private investigators just to track him down. We were both determined. I wanted to finally be able to find my true love, and Casey wanted to get some closure with his first true love. We eventually found him. Colin lived alone in a nice part of San Francisco. He seemed unemployed, and the only thing in his life which appeared to be any kind of obligation was walking to the strip clubs on Broadway every night. Casey and I caught him coming out of one late one night. Colin lived like a ghost haunting a nearly empty studio apartment. All he had was a mattress on the floor and a face which looked like it was about 60, even though I knew he was in his 30s. I'm just trying to have nothing, so maybe then she will leave me alone. There's nothing left to strip from me, Colin explained. I already knew Colin's past romantic struggles because of Holly Eve. I didn't know that she was otherwise still affecting him personally. I don't know what happened. Suddenly I can't get rid of her, Colin lamented. I've noticed that if I keep a low profile and live as little life as possible, that she comes around less though. I agreed. Something seemed to be going on with Holly Eve recently. Something was making her more aggressive and changing her patterns. Colin thought she could sense someone was close to unraveling her curse, solving the riddle, that she was getting desperate and angry, feeling herself slipping away and lashing out. What's with going to strip clubs every night? Casey asked. beating me to my question, which I thought was much more important at this point. Colin's face instantly got guilty. He struggled to get words out suddenly. If I pass it on, it's better, Colin mumbled. What, Casey? And I asked at the same time. It's easiest if I can pass on Holly Eve to someone who she can attach to romantically. Even if it's completely fake and for money, then I can keep her at bay, at least for a night. I have no other choice, Colin explained. So then Holly Eve gets attached to these poor women who give you lap dances. But she leaves you alone, Casey asked Colin. Colin looked long into our eyes, and I was taken back by how tired he looked. He looked like a man who hadn't had a good night of sleep in years. You know you're not going to beat this, right? Colin asked us. Neither of us answered. She's not a person, she's not a spirit, she's a virus, and humans never beat viruses, ever. She doesn't die, she just gets passed around and then comes back again like a cold, Colin said. No response from Casey or me. You'll never be able to figure out where Holly Eve starts and ends because it might not even be her. My family might be even more screwed up than hers was. Maybe she got it from me. We break people, and they break us. That's all it is, Colin rambled. Do you have the other part of this? Casey cut off Colin and showed him the half-heart necklace. Colin flinched at the sight of the jewelry. I did as well. Casey hadn't told me he had gotten the necklace from Holly Eve's mom. Where did you get that? Colin asked, suddenly taking on the posture and demeanor of Gollum from Lord of the Rings when he sees his precious. Where's your half of the necklace? Casey asked, sternly. Colin kept the other half of the heart necklace in a drawer by his bed. He agreed to take it back to Holly Eve's old bedroom with us that night. He didn't think that would work though. He had always had that necklace. Holly Eve could have taken it back anytime. He would try though. We gave him no choice. We drove him up the coast in the middle of the night. Kelly had told Casey that a chunk of Holly Eve's childhood home still existed, deep in overgrown woods. Again, Casey didn't reveal this information to me until we were on the way there. I used the drive to take some time and question Colin. Why had Colin even reached out to me on Reddit in the first place? He dismissed it away quickly. He would go through periods where he wanted to solve the curse, and he thought I might be onto something. He changed his mind after he shared his story with me, and nothing changed. We made it to Holly Eve's half-burned down old home a bit before daybreak, in the darkest hours of the night, in the middle of a cold rainstorm. Colin told us Holly Eve's room looked to still be there, up a steep staircase. We thought Colin was following us. We were wrong. We got to the top of the stairs and looked down to the bottom where we saw the flash of a knife in the shallow light of the darkened space. We watched as Colin slowly drew that knife up to his neck. She's here, Colin said softly. Casey. And I watched as Colin held that knife at his neck with it trembling in his hand, eventually slightly driving the sharp blade into his soft skin. Give me both parts of the necklace. Colin screamed up at us. I followed Colin's frightened eyes and saw that they were looking behind us. I whipped around, and for the quickest of seconds I saw a charred figure standing right behind Casey. And I then saw that figure rush at Casey. I couldn't react fast enough to help Casey. Holly Eve's apparition knocked him down the stairs, and I watched him tumble down about 20 steps until he landed at Colin's feet. I could feel a cold wind rush at me next, but I hurried down the stairs and was able to avoid it. My foot caught one of the steps awkwardly and twisted, tripping me and sending me down the stairs just like Casey. In a flash, I was at the bottom, back with Colin, and I could see he had dropped his knife down to his waist. Casey was on the ground between us, knocked out. You can't take it from me. You can't take her from me, Colin whispered to me as he stood above me. What? I asked and looked back up the stairs, seeing Holly Eve's apparition standing there, swaying at the top. I don't want to let go of her, Colin went on. I went to look back at Colin, and just as I did, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Holly Eve fly down the entire flight of stairs in a blink, gliding on air. I found myself between the two of them. I looked up and saw them staring into each other's eyes. Suddenly, the newfound strength Colin had found started to vanish. He started to tremble and step away from Holly Eve. She held out her hand and motioned for him to give her something. I could feel something radiating out of Holly Eve. It was a sadness, no longer anger, a yearning to be set free. It prompted a revelation in me. I think she was able to plant there as I sat at her feet. It was not Holly Eve who was holding on. It was Colin. I looked up into Holly Eve's burning eyes, and memories that were not mine flooded into my mind. I was with Holly Eve on that property out in the woods in the middle of the night. I was pressed up against a tree by a young Colin, his eyes soft and kind as he moved in to kiss me delicate on the lips. There was no denying it felt true. I then looked into Colin's eyes from the ground. They were burning just like Holly Eve's. I was transported back to that moment in the woods, looking at a younger, fuller Holly Eve, who I saw smile for the very first time. She was a different person as young Colin was with her there, and he uttered those 3 dangerous little words, "I love you." Still on the floor, I watched fat tears start to drop out of Colin's eyes. Another memory started to come to me. I was now out in the field outside of the house, looking at an older, more rustic version of the building we were currently in, resting on a moonlit night in a soft wind, ignited in flame. I watched young Holly Eve dash across the field and disappear into the house. Then I was inside the house, barely able to see through all the smoke, but I still saw Holly Eve rushing through her old bedroom, searching for something, finding her way in the smoke, coughing and slowing. She wasn't finding it and she was succumbing to the smoke. It wasn't long before she dropped to the hardwood floor, but she also got what she came for. Clutched in her hand was that half-heart necklace Colin had given her. I was back on the floor as well, looking up at Colin and Holly Eve's spirit, locked in a stare. "I came back to your house to tell you I wanted to be with you. I had changed my mind," Colin said to Holly Eve. "I just didn't get there in time." I was back in the burning house again in a memory that wasn't mine. I looked out the window and saw a young Colin running through the field outside, making his way to the house in a full-on sprint. Back on the floor, out of the memory, I was still looking at Colin cry above me. "You don't believe me?" Colin asked Holly Eve. She shook her head. "No." Colin reached out and put his hands softly on Holly Eve's forehead, and I was transported back to the memory. I was inside the house, the flames licking at me. I could feel their heat on me, and I could barely see because of the smoke all around. Yet, I could see Colin frantically searching the house, making his way up to Holly Eve's bedroom. I heard him call out for her, his voice breaking with sadness and panic. He kept screaming and screaming. What he didn't know yet, I could already see. Holly Eve on the ground, the flames already to her, consuming her not far from me on the floor. I think the smoke took out Holly Eve, and she couldn't even feel her body being consumed with flames. Thankfully, she didn't scream in pain, she just laid there and succumbed, and Colin still had no idea. He moved through the smoke calling for her, coughing, and nearly succumbing himself. He could feel it though. I could feel him scream out in pain as flames caught him, eventually catching his clothes on fire. I watched him get taken by the flames and collapse next to me. I saw his blue eyes shining through the smoke as they laid upon Holly Eve, fully aflame, just a handful of feet from him. I watched tears fall from those eyes as he slipped away. Back in the room, I watched Colin strip his shirt off and reveal extensive scarring over a good portion of his torso. The sight seemed to soften Holly Eve. She looked at the scars all over his chest, and back in her eyes started to wet. "I came back for you," Colin said softly. Back in the burning house in the memory, I watched firefighters rush in and take Colin away just as he passed out. They didn't get Holly Eve. She was left there to burn. The memories drifted away, and I felt myself completely in the moment on the floor, looking up at Colin and Holly Eve. "You never stay," Colin said to Holly Eve. I felt Holly Eve communicate back to him silently, "You want me to stay." I was back in memories, this time in what appeared to be Colin's teenage bedroom, him clutching the half-heart necklace, rubbing it with his thumb, looking at a mirror as he sees the image of Holly Eve's apparition for just a second. His face lights up. He squeezes the half-heart necklace, then she's gone, and his face falls flat. "I kept trying to find ways to find you," Colin explained. Back in Colin's memories, we were in a cheap motel room with a sex worker. They were kissing, but he looked hesitant. He kept looking at the mirror, clearly trying to find something. The sex worker noticed and grew wary. She pulled away from him. "What is this? You have someone watching you or something?" the sex worker asked Colin. Just as she finished her question, the image of Holly Eve flashed in the mirror Colin was looking at. The sex worker saw Colin's eyes light up, and then hers followed his until she caught a glimpse of Holly Eve in the mirror. the sex worker screamed and pushed away Colin. Then she rushed out of the room. I paid for love because it was the only way I could connect with you. I couldn't date regular girls anymore because you always chased them away. Then you even chased away the paid ones, and I had to go yet another route, Colin said. The memories kicked back in, and I was in a dark strip club with Colin, watching him hand over $20 bills to a stripper looking beyond exhausted. The strip clubs were a public enough space that you didn't seem to terrorize the girls. And I would get to see you, Colin went on. In the strip club, I could see Colin getting a lap dance. Across the little space sat Holly Eve. But now I'm almost out of money. That's why I came here tonight. My last chance to maybe keep seeing you, Colin said. I blinked deliberately a bunch of times and was able to get myself out of the memory and back into the house, looking up at Colin and Holly Eve. Eyes still locked on each other. Holly Eve slowly reached out her open palm upwards, wanting something. Colin bucked, clearly not wanting to give it up. She just kept her hand there, kept her eyes sad and haunting. Still, Colin didn't give in. I watched Holly Eve's mouth move, but no words came out. Yet, I could tell exactly the single word she mouthed to him. Please. I watched Colin think about it for a few more moments, then hand over his half of the half-heart necklace. I'm sorry, he muttered. It's crazy to say now, but I did love you back then. Holly Eve moved towards Colin. He flinched for a second. She wrapped him in a strong hug and extended one. They held there for a little while. He just kept saying he was sorry over and over and over again. Eventually, Colin was standing there all by himself. Holly Eve was gone. I got Casey up and got the three of us out of there. Colin told us he did feel like he could finally live life now before he walked into his apartment. I didn't really believe him. I wasn't sure if things really worked out for Colin or not. He never appeared on the Curse of Holly Eve subreddit. The rest of the group started to reappear though. Everyone was noting that Holly Eve seemed to have gone away. I noticed it too. I went a long time without any kind of encounter or even vibe from her. I swear I used to frequently feel a lingering presence around me when I was alone, and it was gone. Eventually, some members of the group even started talking about successfully dating, no longer getting issues, and attacks from Holly Eve. They were finally finding love. I gave it some time, and I told Katie about what happened, and we felt it was okay for us to part ways. We got divorced as quickly as we could. I started to branch out myself once we separated. A few days ago I set up a dating app profile. Then earlier today I started skimming through profiles, sending likes and messages. I was elated when I received my first like from someone. I raced to find out who she would be. I haven't looked at the profile yet. The name was enough to get me to close the app. Holly Eve.